All righty. So this is, of course, my favorite day of any NTA conferences when we get to hear all of the national time transfer accounts and counting women's work and gender papers. So this session, we have three excellent presentations from Jordana de Jesus, professor in the Department of Demography and Actuarial Sciences at the Universidad de Rio Grande do Norte. I'm probably mangling all of the pronunciations. She's presenting joint work with Simona Wanman and Cassio Tura, time transfer accounts by types of households and income groups in Brazil. Then Estela Rivera, research specialist at the Notre Dame Institute for Global Development, will be talking about variations in the contribution to housework and care. Piedad Ordinola, Associate Professor of Statistics, Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Bogota, will be talking to us about the gender bonus and aging in Colombia. And then we have, wonderfully, two excellent discussants. Sadhu Duombo, Director General of the Demographic Dividend Observatory in Mali, and Marisa Bukele Perez, Professor of Economics at Universidad de la República Montevideo, Uruguay. Let's see, we'll start with Jordana, and we have a pre-recorded presentation that Mari is going to start for us.
Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, my NTA friends. My name is Jordana. I am professor of demography, and I'm recording this presentation from Brazil. Today I will talk about time transfer accounts by types of households income and income groups in Brazil. In a study I'm working together with Simone and Cassio. Well, so the first thing we need to emphasize before starting any analysis on time used by gender in Brazil is that time used data are extremely limited here, particularly if compared to other countries in Latin America. Unfortunately, we do not have any time use surveys, and this limitation has hindered the study of unpaid care and housework in the country. We do have a nationally representative Brazilian household survey, but it collects only stylized questions about housework. It has two questions. The first asks whether the person has helped in any household activity, and the second one asks about the number of hours per week the person has dedicated to all the activities together. Social science in Brazil have tried to do their best with these two questions, but as I said, there are limitations. That's why we took some time to start measuring NTTA for Brazil. However, more recently, in my PhD dissertation, we tried to overcome those limitations and started to provide results for the gendered economy in the largest country in Latin America. Why this kind of information is so important in Brazil? There are profound inequalities in household consumption and production in Brazil, with effects on the distribution of time use. Feeding back the cycle of inequality, which makes our country an interesting case for NTTA analysis. Women, particularly poor and Black women, are the ones who dedicate more time to unpaid care, direct or indirect, since they have less access to services and home appliances. For example, less than 30% of the poorest households in Brazil have a washing machine, against 90% in the wealthiest households. Therefore, in such an unequal country, it is essential to go beyond the NTA and even beyond the average profile of NTTA and measure time by population subgroups. Then, for this study, we have two main objectives. The first one is to measure the degree of marked and non-marked specialization by gender in Brazil. We started by comparing Brazil to other countries to give us a sense of how Brazil is situated in an international perspective. Next, we measure specialization by income deciles to show the role of socioeconomic difference to specialization. As I said, Brazil is a very unequal, and therefore there is no one single story, but many. After examining specialization, we focus in the non-market production to look at net time transfer, again by income groups, but also by household types, since our hypothesis is that household composition matters for time use. We draw data from the Pesquisa Nacional por Amostra de Domicílios of 2013, a nationally representative survey in Brazil. As I have mentioned in the survey, there is only information about total time spent on housework services. So we use an indirect method to fix the number of hours of unpaid childcare, a missing information in the survey. To do this, we use an adjustment factor estimated from national time use surveys from Colombia and Paraguay. This method improves the data from PNAD and offers indirect estimates of time devoted to direct unpaid childcare in Brazil. After adjusting the Brazilian data, we applied the methodology suggested by Don Howard to generate the NTTA. Specialization is calculated as the difference between hours per week dedicated by men and women in market activities, the market work, and in non-market activities, unpaid care work. And finally, we estimate net time transfers by income deciles and types of household with children and or spouse. So, how do market and non-market specialization by gender in Brazil compare to other countries? And do income levels play any role in shaping specialization patterns in Brazil? This figure shows the average difference in working hours, market, and unpaid care work in some selected countries. Brazil shows a comparable degree of work specialization as Colombia, lower specialization than Senegal, India, and Mexico, but a higher level than the United States. In Brazil, we have experienced a very fast and deep decline in fertility rate that must explain part of the fact we have a lower degree of specialization in unpaid care work compared to other countries in Latin America and also in countries with a similar level of development. Now, this figure shows the average difference in working hours, market, and unpaid care work by household income deciles in Brazil. The left side shows the degree of specialization among the 10% poorest group, and the right side shows the work specialization in the 10% richest group, the highest decile. The patterns observed within Brazil by income deciles resemble, to a certain degree, the specialization estimated for countries of different income levels. Among the poorest group, the left side, the degree of specialization resembles Mexico patterns. And among the richest group, the right side, it resembles the USA patterns. This happens because in Brazil, as income increases, women dedicate more hours to market activity and less hours to unpaid activity. This pattern explains the reduction in difference in hours allocated by men and women in the market and non-market activity, squeezing the two curves. The large difference between genders in market and unpaid work is equal to 48 hours and occurs at around the age of 30. On the other hand, among the richest group, the gender difference at the same age is only 16 hours. Moreover, as income levels increase, the point at which specialization is the highest moves to older ages. For poorest women, it's more difficult to combine both market and non-market activities, since they do not have support to take care of their children and they dedicate more time to unpaid activity and they are more affected at younger ages. So, Considering the high degree of non-market work specialization by gender, how do net time transfers vary by income and household types in Brazil? Here we have net time transfer by household income deciles in Brazil. The left side shows transfers done by women, and the right side shows transfers done by men. The darker the curve gets, the higher is the income. On average, poor women in Brazil became net transfer at 15 years old, while rich women became a net transfer at 23 years old. There is also a difference in the level of transfer. At 30 years old, poor women transfer on average almost 5 hours a day, and rich women transfer less than 1 hour a day. For men, there is no significant difference by income groups. On average, at all ages and all income levels, they are net consumer. This shows that income should be taken into consideration when analyzing Brazilian case. And now we turn our attention to household arrangements, analyzing net time transfer done by women. Since 82% of all household production in Brazil is performed by women. When women do not have children and do not have spouse at the household, they are the least demanded. They transfer half an hour per day at maximum. When we look at married women, but without children, the net time transfer is around 1 hour per day, and it increases a little when they and their spouse get older. For a single mother, the red line, women who is around 25 years old transfer around 4 hours a day for their children. Finally, if women are married and have children at the household, we can see that the demands from a spouse and children add up, and they can reach 5 hours a day. This shows that taking care of house and children by their own represents less demand than when they have a partner that supposedly could contribute to childcare and housework. Unlike the presence of partners increase the transfers done by women. So in Brazil, where income inequality is high, gender specialization is strongly related to socioeconomic context. One explanation is the market services. Housekeepers, daycare, laundry, eating out services are more accessible for wealthier families, freeing the time of richer women to participate in the labor market. At the same, public policies have been insufficient to support more impoverished families, usually composed by low-educated and Black women and their demands of unpaid care. We also show that household arrangements also matter for the degree of specialization in Brazil, since changes in the composition of households combined with social norms implying different demands. Not surprising, the number of children increased the demand for unpaid care work. However, spouses also increased the demand for women's unpaid care work, reinforcing gender specialization in Brazil. In terms of future research, we plan to improve our indirect estimates of unpaid care activities in Brazil, but adding information on unpaid care with adults and the elderly that we still don't have. We will also examine simultaneously socioeconomic levels and household arrangements, considering both the analysis of age profiles and models based on microdata. In a different front, we plan to examine the extent to which wealthier women buy time by hiring housekeepers and how this market of housekeepers and buying services, how this market helps to mediate gender conflicts in Brazil. And finally, it's never too much to stress that we need a detailed time use survey in Brazil. Thank you.
What a great note to end with there. Always need more time use surveys. I love that we ended the last session with Ruben and the great news that Kenya is going to have a time use survey. All right, our next author, let me make sure that I am saying this right. Yeah, is Estela. Marie, could you please start the video from Estela?
Oh, hello, greetings from Indiana. And in my presentation today, I will be talking about how the needs and the contribution to unpaid care work varies across household and individual life cycle stages in Mexico. By now, thanks to the Counting Women's Work project, we all know that women do more unpaid care work than men and that this happens throughout the whole life cycle. This, along with the monetary imputation of the unpaid care work that women do, has been a very important contribution of the Unpaid Care Work project. It is also fairly well recognized by now that to decrease the gender gap in unpaid care work and in labor market participation, it is necessary not only to recognize, but also to reduce and redistribute unpaid care work, what is commonly known as the 3 Rs. In order to do this, it is necessary, among other things, to acknowledge that unpaid care work is done by individuals in different life cycle stages, not only by the household head and its partner, which is what a lot of research does. It is also necessary to recognize that the amount and type of unpaid care work needed within the household depends on the life cycle stage of the household itself and on the individuals who are available to contribute. And thirdly, it is necessary to understand how unpaid care work is distributed within the household, again, beyond the household head and the spouse, so we know where we are departing from and what we may need to change. In this presentation, I contribute to this agenda by showing how individuals contribute to unpaid care work and how this varies across the individual and household life cycle in Mexico. And my data refers to Mexico 2014, which is the latest live data that we have. In order for you to understand how I do my analysis and how I define household life cycle stages and individual life cycle stages, want to tell you that I divide household life cycle households in 5 different hierarchical types. And the first one being young households with no children. And by young, I mean those where the household head is younger than 60 years old. Second, we have households where there are children of the head who are aged 0 to 14 years old. Thirdly, we have households where there are children 15 to 19 years old, but no children younger than that. The fourth type is those households where all children of the head are grown up or older than 20 years old. And finally, we have households where the head is 60 years old or older. Now, in terms of individuals, I classify them according to a combination of age, sex, and their relationship to the household head. So first we have the head or its spouse divided by sex. And then we have children 15 to 29 years old, children 30 years or older, and other household members, all disaggregated by sex. The indicators that I will be analyzing are the share of a certain type of work done by individuals with certain characteristics in a certain type of household. So for example, the share of housework done by female children aged 15 to 29 years old in households where there are children 0 to 14 years old is, or the way I estimate it is, I first take for each individual household that is in that category, that has children 0 to 14 years old, I estimate the contribution or how many hours each individual does to housework. Then I add up all the work done by female children 15 to 29 years old and divided that by all the housework done by everyone in the household. In other words, I take the individual shares or the share of housework done by all female children 15 to 29 years old in individual households. And then I divide that across all households, or I average it across all households that are that have children 0 to 14 years old. What is it that we get? Well, this figure shows the share of housework done by individuals with of different types across different types of households. It should not come as a surprise that in most households, the female household head or the female spouse of the household head do most of the housework. They do between 49 or 50% and 60% of all housework. That varies a little by type of households. And the other thing I want you to notice is that that housework is a very gendered work, and that other members contribute, but this is mostly female members. So for example, in households that have children 15 to 29 years old, the female children 59 to 29 years old do 20% of all housework. And then in households where the head is 60 years older or older, female children do 15% of housework. What about childcare? Well, let's focus first on households where there are children 0 to 14 years old. In this case, women do the female head or female spouse do 65% of household of childcare, while male heads do 20%. But also, I want you to notice that female young children who are aged 50 to 29%, 29 years old, do 7% of childcare in this kind of households. These are not, however, all the only type of households that have children. And this figure shows that. It shows how childcare is organized across different kinds of households. And what I want you to notice is that in all cases, childcare is shared across different members. I mean, we see that there is no house called type, where childcare is done only by one member, but that distribution varies across different kinds of households, but also that it is always female members who do most of the childcare, and that there's always different types of female members contributing to childcare. So for example, if we focus not on the red lines, but on yellow lines, which is the households where there are children 15 to 29 years old, we have that most of the childcare is done by the female children aged 50 to 29 years old. And that in that case, the female head or female spouse also contribute about 20% of childcare. So what we conclude from this is that childcare is a communal process and that it is shared across women in the household. In the case of elder care, the organization of elder care shows greater sharing across individuals, as this figure shows, as well as greater participation of men, and also greater variation across household types. For example, in households where all children are grown up, which is the purple line, the male head or male spouse does 53% of care, whereas the female head does 27%. The rest is distributed among male and female children, with male children doing a little more. In households where there are children 15 to 29 years old, the way that elder care is shared is more distributed across different members. This is the line in yellow. And again, that changes across household types. So to sum up, in general, women do more unpaid care work than men. That should not surprise us. However, contrary to what is assumed in the literature, not all unpaid care work is done by the head and its spouse. And also, this varies across household types, and care is shared across household members. Now, disregarding inter-household distribution of unpaid care work across different members may lead to disregarding or ignoring the contribution of children and other household members. It may lead to underestimating the inequality of unpaid care work across genders. And it also may lead to not recognizing the instances when men contribute, which is important to understand how we can list or how we can go about redistributing, and when is it that men contribute more to unpaid care work. On a final note, I want to say that this is clearly work in progress. I need to refine the way that I show the contribution of individuals according to their position in the household. The way that I am depicting that might not be the best way. In particular, when there are multi-generational households. So I think it's important. I mean, I think we are showing results that are important and make sense, but I also think that there might be better ways to describing it according to how we classify individuals or categorize individuals. So I'll be working towards that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the questions and comments section. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I will be talking about gender bonus and aging in Colombia. And this is particularly special for Latin America, not only for Colombia, because we're all about to start the aging, the last part of the demographic transition, and just the aging is on top of most of our countries. There are already 3 countries in Latin America that have aged. Those are Cuba, Chile, and Uruguay. And the rest we're coming in the incoming decades. So in Colombia, in about a decade and a half, will be aged already. Since 2015, we have very low fertility, below 2.2, and the whole process is just moving on. And yet, our economies are very unequal, and we have not prepared for that, for the aging process. So the gender bonus seems as a good idea. To exploit and to use as a way to alleviate all implications of this aging process. So we're very happy to show you the results about using the National Time Survey from 2016. It is the latest. Colombia has 2 already. This is the very last one. It's nationwide representative. And we want to explore the household characterization in relation to time use, labor market participation, but in particular, we want to talk about informality and how is the gender role playing something within this whole context. Why informality? Because informality is huge in Colombia, as it is in many other Latin American countries. About almost half of the workforce is informal. So actually for this year, 2016, is 46.8% in Colombia. So being it so large, it partly explains why the high inequality we have in Colombia. It is very important to study the role of gender and time use within this context. If we base our estimations using the national census data that was just published and was done in 2018, about 4 out of 10 households are female-headed in Colombia. So this is the whole context that we'll be working on. This table shows the average household structure in Colombia. So on the left column, we have the female-headed households. In the right column, the male-headed households. Those are average, and we have done the difference on average for both of them. So they are very similar, actually, in terms of age and in terms of household members, number of household members, but not in terms of the presence or cohabitation of the partner. Usually female-headed households do not cohabitate with the partner, while male-headed households, most of them, almost 80%, do cohabitate with their partners. For all the rest, the average or proportions are very, very close, even for the unsatisfied basic needs. A score that we're using is about 40%, 41% for each case. So male-headed households tend to be larger in Colombia because they live or cohabitate with their partners. That's basically the main difference. There's also a large proportion of households with female head that have subsidized social security, which is what we're going to use as a proxy for labor market informality. That is the information that we have available in the survey, and that's why we're using this proxy. And we don't find, as I said, many differences in other characteristics, including poverty as measured as unsatisfied basic needs. So if we look at the household's average characteristics per household head gender, you will see here in this table, once and again, we have the left column is male-headed households and the right column is female-headed households. And the big division is who is the head or the gender of the household head. We don't see many differences again about facilities or sanitary facilities or in the capacity on know how to read or poverty or other of these wealth characteristics, but we do have differences in housework production, and those are basically due to care production. Very similar to other NTTA estimations, even the same one that we did for Colombia using the previous time use survey. Housework consumption and care consumption is very similar across genders, and now that we have split it by the gender of the household head, that's very similar. But the main difference in the housework production is basically due to care production. So women in female-headed households dedicate less time to unpaid housework and care production than women in male-headed households. So that's the main result that we are finding here. And this reduction in care activities is larger than the reduction in unpaid housework activities. While men in male-headed households dedicate more time to care production, slightly more time, mainly because men in female-headed households tend to be children and elderly, not the partner. So if we look at this standard graph that NTTA produces, it has the difference in hours per day between females and males. So if the difference is positive or above 0, it means that women are doing it more than men, and the opposite if it is negative. So as expected, we usually find that housework and male care is a female production thing for women, while market work and leisure and sleep is male dominated. So when we look at the differences in the gender of the household head, this pattern it's even more pronounced. So in male household headed households, market work difference is huge compared to those that are female household headed. And at the same time, housework is much more feminine in the male household head. So we have also measured the area under the curve, or the total that will be in the life cycle for all ages between 10 and 90 plus. So we can see that in female headed households, leisure is hugely disadvantage against women, while it is more of an advantage in male households. But also market work, we see a huge difference between these two, and housework is not so different, which is something that called our attention. So we started to look at, and this is actually the main concern that we have. So if we see these differences between household headed by males and females, do they also have differences when we look at or split them between formal and informal? And we again redo the same exercise and look at the very common characteristics like those for poverty or the unsatisfied basic needs. And then also what we are concerned about, housework production and care production. And once and again, we don't see a huge difference between the poverty between males and females, but when we split it between formal and informal is when we start to see the differences. So characteristics like age is not a big of a difference, but look at the first row, sanitary facilities, then we see a big difference. Males or households that are, who have a male head and this person works in the formal market, 90% of them have sanitary facilities, while if this person works in the informal market, it's only 65%. Something similar happens if the household is headed by a female. In the formal market is 91% with a sanitary facility, but 68% if this woman works in the informal market. And at the same time, we see that the difference in the housework production, it's not so big among males, whether they work for formal or informal market, but it is big for women. There's a big difference between those who work in the formal or the informal market. So household production increases 3 hours per week for women working in the informal market, and care production increases 2 hours per week. So I just want to show you quickly the household characteristics per market work formality. So just remember that we're using the subsidized social security as a proxy to measure informality in the job market. And we find women within households that participate in the informal market work produce more housework and care time. As expected, both women and men that participate in informal market work are poorer than formal market work households. So when we look at the characteristics per market work formality, we see that there's individual formality that we could measure it in this way, or we can measure it as the formality of the head of the household, or we can measure it as the head of the household partner. So we look at these 3 different definitions, and we decided to take the first one, which is the proportion of the total number of members that are enrolled in the formal or informal market. And if 50% or more are enrolled in the formal market, we characterize this household as formal, otherwise it's informal. But if you look at there's not a big difference between these 3 kinds of characterization or labeling the households. It's very similar whether you take the household head, the partner, or the individual formality. We prefer the first one because, as I said, most of the female-headed households do not cohabitate with the partner. So we prefer to use this one. So now that you know that we are using this concept to split households between formal and informal, and that we're using these gender specifications, and that we're measuring informality as those that are enrolled in the subsidized program in the country, all the following statistics and NTTA profiles follow those definitions. So once and again, if you look at the area under the curve between the formal and informal workers, we see that informal workers do dedicate much more time to housework than those enrolled in the formal sector. And that is basically due to care production, which is the pattern that we will see over and over again. So if we split these.
1 more minute, if you could.
Okay,
is that okay?
sure.
1 minute? All right,
Sure.
thank you.
Okay, so if we split this once and again between male and female, formal and informal, we will see this pattern repeated over and over again. And just, I will jump up to here, which is what we cared most about. So if you look at the profiles on the market work and the formality and gender, we see that male household head and female household head in the right, we see that males produce much less than women, whether they are formal or informal. And women in the informal male-headed household produce the most housework at all ages, while men produce the least. So it seems like informality pushes households to dedicate more time to housework production activities. And if we look at it in this way, we see that production care profiles show a very similar pattern to that of the household production profiles. So the results suggest that women in informal male-headed households produce more care time at almost every age, while formal males produce slightly more care time than informal males. So we have been playing around, doing some preliminary regression analysis, and in those we're finding or corroborating things that we just presented, and that it's basically childcare that is absorbing most of the time for women who are married to a formal male or women in the informal market. So basically, the largest burden for childcare or unpaid housework is put on women married to or cohabitating with formal male, or who are the head of a house in the informal market. So female-headed households are smaller than male-headed households, mainly because the household head is single. Women in female-headed households usually produce less housework and care time than females in male-headed households. Nevertheless, women in the formal female-headed households dedicate less time to housework and care activities than women in informal female-headed households. So they have a double pressure to be for being enrolled in the informal sector of the job market. So informality and the sex of the household head do not seem to affect significantly the time men dedicate to housework and care activities. So we expect, or we hope, to keep on working on this idea. We'll be very happy to see your reactions and comments, because we believe this could have a lot of policy implications, especially in countries with high inequality and with labor markets split between formal and informal, and where we could benefit from using the labor market of women or adding them to the formal market. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Piedad. These were 3 great presentations, and now I would like to bring the first great discussant. Mr. Duombo, are you around?
Thank you, Gretchen.
My pleasure.
Very exciting presentations, and I want to say thank you to all the presenters, all women. This is a gender mark. Okay, thank you. Globally, I think the topic of time use and its evaluation is very relevant for countries, especially for those in development. And I think cultural and gender aspect can affect the role played by individuals due to their sex. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa and in Mali, my country, girl and boy are differently prepared for their adult life. And the first on how to hold an household, and the second on how to gain money. So let's get back to the presentation with 3 or 4 points. Jordana de Jesus and Piedad try to show us how specializations in labor market can affect time use and how household types affect the level of the participation of family members in paid care works. This is very, very good. And I think especially the concept of household life cycle is very instructive for us, showing wherever is the stage of household life cycle, women spend more time than men in housework. This is a very great evidence for, let's say, how to target public policies on women empowerment and get great participation of women in workforce. I think also, according to Jordan, shifting from informal to formal market work can reduce women's participation in housework. I think this is also a good evidence, like the first point I point, and excuse me, my English is not so good, and I want to say that I have just 1 question and 2 general comments. And my question is for Mexico, it's Estela. Yes, I think Mexico had a great part of migrants, especially men outside the country, and they send money to their family, right? is that fact can be a factor which strongly contributes to high level of women's participations to unpaid care work in households. That is my questions. I don't know if it is understood. And now my two comments. They are general, and the first is that we need to get more data in time use, because if unpaid work is harmful accessed, we can understand how much women are not unproductive as we consider they are, especially in developing countries. So we have to advocate for those kinds of data collection and analysis. And in my office, the National Dividend Demographic Observatory, we are working now with the National Statistical Office to see how we can have a survey on time use to move through NTTA analysis. And I hope before next year, we will have maybe some evidence like in Colombia, Mexico, or Brazil to present. The second comment, the last one, I want just to say that someone has to do the housework. This is an evidence. A woman, a man, or a child, someone has to do the job in the household. And it is necessary to understand that men and boys have a role to play. And I think we can use this evidence in our communication strategies to improve and to change the behavior of population of people and let them accept the fact that women have to economically participate to the workforce. And in our countries, there is large part of women than men. In Mali, there are about 51% of women and 49% of men. And I think it is a great opportunity to demographic dividend harnessing, and we have to count with women, but we can't do that if we don't have data. And once again, let's advocate for more data in unpaid, in household, and in time use data. Thank you very much, and excuse me for the English is not too good. Thank you.
It was great. No worries on that count at all. Thank you very much. And our other discussant, Marisa Bukele, please. You have the floor, ma'am.
Well, hello. It is nice to see you again. I thank Gretchen for the invitation to comment in this session. I enjoyed the presentations very much. I will talk about 3 or 4 aspects that I think that are important to Latin American countries. Well, one of them is the extended households. Extended households are important in several Latin American countries, but we know less about them than what. Sorry? Okay. We know.
I think just background noise.
Okay. So I was saying that we know less about extended houses than non-extended households. And even if Estela does not mention the words extended households, her figures show that on average in this type of households, mothers and daughters, adult daughters, are the ones that do the household tasks. So I think that we can introduce the female role in home production when we want to know the factors behind the formation of extended households. For example, It is an interesting question to know if an extended household is more likely when the woman of one generation is absent. For example, the mother is dead, so the father lives with his daughter and his family's daughter. Or another interesting question, I think, is what is the arrangement of women, between women of different generations when they live together? So for example, mothers and adult daughters share unpaid and paid work, or do they substitute one each other? I think we know very little about this in Latin America, and these houses are important, so it's a good idea to study them. Regards to household types, I just have a comment that I didn't see in the presentations, thing that we saw in Uruguay, and I wonder if Estela or Jordana or perhaps Piedad saw it in their countries. We saw that, we found that women spend more time in home production than men when single parents and when living alone at both young and old ages. And I think this is an important point because it gives more information to think about gender roles when we focus on non-couples. Well, I would like to ask if they found something like that. Well, then I will talk about teenagers, but first I would like to talk about the differences between socioeconomic groups. So the signs of the difference shown by Jordana for Brazil are similar to the ones obtained for other countries. And we can explain differences between sex groups or education, thinking on differences in wages or the effect of education per se on gender roles. But I would like to add two factors that I think that are important for Latin American countries. One is related with what we saw in the Colombian case, that is informality. Informality is more likely among the poor, and Piedad results showed that informal women spend more time in home production than formal worker women. I think I now have, well, okay. So I was thinking that when you try to understand why women of different socioeconomic groups behave differently, we could think that the poor women or less educated women have three alternatives. But have three options for the time. That is to assign time to home production, to formal work, paid work, and to informal paid work. And this could be important because informal work is probably easier to be combined with home production. But high educated women perhaps have two options, home production and formal paid work. So I am not sure if to consider that there are different options for different women, widen or narrow the gaps. But, well, I'm looking at Colombian results. I think that to introduce the alternative to distinguish between formal and informal paid work is important, because of the different flexibility they have to combine with home production. The other factor that I think it is important when we study differences between socioeconomic groups is hiring domestic services. Jordana talks about that at the end of the presentation at Future Research. I think it is very important. We can introduce paid domestic services in the explanation based on wages and education, but I want to mention another aspect. Now I come back to Estela's work, because she mentions, we can see that in the Mexican case, we see that girls spend more time in home production than boys when teenagers. But we can expect that this gender difference varies between sexes. Now, I guess that in high sex context, among the richest households, girls do not assign time to home production because women assign little time to home production because they are domestic services. So when we want to model women's behavior, I think that we have to take into account that women were raised differently. So what I mean is that in societies with high inequality and low generational mobility, when we want to model the differences in adults' behavior, we have to think that there were differences that were modeled because of rearing practices, and not only because of explanations of current wages. So differences that come from childhood. Well, that's all I wanted to say. I hope the comments are interesting for the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marisa. We definitely very rarely talk about that, but I do plenty of things because that's the way my mom did them. So beyond sort of what my prevailing shadow wage is for time or anything. So I have not been keeping very good track of the time. So I'm going to ask our paper presenters to please give just a quick gloss on your comments, and then let my lateness encourage all of you, if you can, and if you won't be asleep, to come to the session. It starts at 2 a.m. Hawaii time, so all you Hawaii people, please don't come. But to talk about the time transfer accounts, to talk about where we might take things, and just so heartened to see everything that everyone's doing and taking everything in such great direction. So I was hoping we could maybe use some of that time later on tomorrow morning to keep this going. So Jordana, if you would like to respond to some of the comments, please.
Okay. Thank you all for the comments. I'm really glad to be here to talk about our study for Brazil, because we have a really hard work to get here, because we don't have any time user survey. And we had a lot of questions. We want to go to more study about extended family. It's really important in the case of Brazil. And we also would like to understand, because as Marisa said, here in Brazil, rich families raise their girls to go to market work. It's different. Housework should not be their first work at house. They must study, and this has implications to labor participation and inequality in wage in Brazil. But now that we can make more studies, that we have more information, we intend to make a lot of other studies, and thinking about socioeconomic status, gender, and racial questions. It's important to mention that in Brazil we have 7 million women working as housekeepers, and this should be addressed in this topic of net time transfer, because they are doing the work that other women are not doing. So it's important when we think about Brazilian case. And thank you so much about the comments, and we can go talking later if we have more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordana. Estela?
Sure. Well, quick answers, and more than anything, I guess saying that I don't have answers. So in terms of the migrants and the importance of migration in Mexico and how that might be increasing the work of women because there aren't less household members, yes, that might be true. Haven't really looked at that. At some point I tried seeing whether migrant households have more these work differently, but once you take that into surveys, the numbers are really small. But that's an interesting question. Now, in socioeconomic status and gender norms, yes, I mean, absolutely, I agree with Marisa's comments. But I think even when we can expect to see an effect of socioeconomic, well, variations by socioeconomic status, I also think that we ought to disaggregate more in terms of the kind of work that we do. Because certainly we can expect rich girls not to do as much housework, but there's something that is always less sensitive. For example, COVID and children being in the household, in the house, and having to take care of them, or ill family members. So just understanding that, I mean, what is distributed and what is not, and how that varies by socioeconomic status, I think is key, even just for understanding how gender is constructed and how we might change that. And use my time.
Thank you very much. And Piedad, would you like to close us out?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the Dumbo and Marisa's comments. They are very useful to us. And indeed, we plan to take into account as many variables as we can. We know that extended families are different to non-extended families. We know that life cycle also play a role. We know that socioeconomic status as measured as education or any other measure do also play a role on time use as well. But I just want to clarify that informality is not a synonym of poverty in Colombia. As I was showing you, the unsatisfied basic needs in Colombia for those households that are formal and informal, it's not necessarily the same thing because it's so huge. It's almost half and half. So if you look at any other poverty rate or wealth measure in Colombia, poverty is well below 50%, while informality is 50%. And that's also the case in Brazil and Mexico and other Latin American countries. So that's what makes it very interesting to explore and to work on. But when you look at the poorest of the poor, so yes, probably those are female-headed households of women who work in the informal labor market. On the other extreme, we have male-headed households and the males are working in the formal market, but their partners who are women are not working, and they are probably highly educated as well, and they probably have access to pay for many services, people, and things that help in household production, and still they are not working. So that's probably where we're targeting the whole idea. You know? Just we could bring these women to the labor market. We can enroll them in the formal market, but at the same time, we need to fight against this huge inequality that poor women are suffering, because it's not fair. Simply, that's not how it's supposed to be, right? So they are just having this huge burden. They are in poverty and working a lot and getting very small pay and also doing a lot of housework. So it's kind of these two extremes that we are targeting, or that we want to look at and show numbers about these two extremes, basically.
Thank you, Piedad. Thank you all of our presenters and discussants and all of you for your attention. And we'll see you tomorrow.